Hi, everyone. This is your host, Betsy Wurzel, of Chatting with Betsy on Passion World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the station or the host. Folks, I always have exceptional guests on my show. Yes, I'm going to toot my own horn. Toot, toot. And I have an exceptional guest today. I have with me today Leslie Jorez, who is a licensed marriage family therapist. Leslie is multi-talented. She's not only a therapist, family therapist, she is author and writer. She has 2 books out. One is an e-book, her newest book, Hero Husband Building, a Super Marriage with Truth, Confidence, and Authentic Leadership. I hope I'm reading that right, Leslie. Give me my own handwriting. Thank you. And you have another book, Blueprint for a Lasting Marriage, Creating Your Happily Ever After with More Intention, Less Work. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to say this. I mean, I was married 39 years. If you need to read these books, if you plan on getting into a long-term partnership or getting married. And Leslie also has a podcast that I was on back in August that I highly recommend. And the name of her podcast is Happily Ever After, Just the Beginning, which is on webtalkradio.net. And Leslie also has a Facebook group for men. How do you like that? Good guys, great husbands. Now, you don't really hear, I haven't, of Facebook groups for men. So that is, I think that's great. That's awesome. And I want to welcome Leslie Jorez to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, well, you are welcome. It's my pleasure. I love being on your show, and I highly recommend for people to listen to your show and get in contact with you. I'm going to start off with, because it just popped into my head, do you do coaching and consulting via Zoom throughout the country?
Yes, throughout the country and actually throughout the world. I've actually had clients out of Canada and out of England. So, yes, basically any place that speaks English, because unfortunately that's really the only language I speak. Much to my chagrin, I should speak another language, but I don't.
Oh, I only speak English, so I understand.
And sometimes I wonder actually whether I managed to speak English, but okay, we'll just see where it is.
I used to know. I used to know some Spanish curse words because I went to high school with the large Hispanic population, and that I caught on real quick. But English is definitely the only language I know. I also want to ask you, do you counsel families, husbands and wives, or just men?
Well, I actually do couples. I mean, I do couples and men. I mean, pretty much I will work with people who want to know how to make their relationships better. I no longer work strictly with families, although I still sometimes will see families, because that's a slightly different thing. I used to do that, but I've been focusing on couples. It was interesting because one of my very, very first clients, and this is going back many years, she came to me when she was 6 years old, and she had anxiety. And as I'm working with her, it was like, well, of course she has anxiety. She's basically the rope in her divorced parents' tug of war. Her parents got divorced when she was 2. And, as I'm sitting here working with this little girl going, I can't give this child any tools. She doesn't have any control in her life. And that's when I decided, okay, if I'm going to help her, I need to help her parents. And so that's how I actually started doing most of my of couples work. because the truth of the matter is what children want and need most is a stable, solid home, which research shows is best served by a stable two-parent household.
Yes, I agree with that. And I had to ask you this before I forget.
Mm-hmm.
I don't write questions down, folks. I totally know what I want to ask, and sometimes I don't know what I want to ask, and I just go with the flow of the conversation. Have you seen an increase in your business since the pandemic of couples realizing, maybe we're not meant to be together, or have had enough since they were with each other longer than they used to be?
Well, the challenge with the pandemic, and yes, I mean, it created all kinds of challenges for people, but what it actually did was almost put a magnifying glass onto relationships that were struggling, because, you know, all of the normal ways of diverting or managing stuff was taken away from us. We couldn't go out and hang out with friends at the bar or go to, these things that we would normally do. And so we were kind of like locked in our homes for a while. And unfortunately, I wish more people had taken advantage of that, that time, that opportunity to make things better, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about relationships. And I go back to one of my early clients. She was so funny. I was working with her and her husband, and she comes into my office one day, and she's all excited. And she said, "I had an epiphany." And I went, "Great, what was it?" And she said, "Relationships aren't natural." And I burst out laughing, and I said, "Well, where did you get the idea they were?" I mean, and up to a point, relationships are. But then we start running into, this person thinks differently than I do. They have different experiences. They interpret a conversation differently. And it's like, yes. And then people don't know what to do with that. And so then they start thinking, well, if my partner and I disagree about something, we're not supposed to be together. And it's like, well, no two people are going to agree about everything. It's how do we disagree? What's the process? Is it respectful? Is it productive? Or do we just kind of retreat into our corners and wait for the bell to ring so we can come out fighting again? Which, quite frankly, is not, most people, that's not what they're looking for when they get into a long-term relationship. But they don't know that there are tools and skills and things that they can learn to make it easier, because, relationships are natural.
Relationships are work. It's hard work. It's not, both people have to work at it. I mean, I remember my mother-in-law telling me, marriage isn't 50-50, Betsy. And, of course, back then, when I was 22, I didn't know what I know now. It really should be 100% and 100%. Both people putting in 100%. And I think that the pandemic, it caused a global mental health crisis, and I'm glad in a way that it put mental health out there in the open. You're hearing public service announcements about, mental health, depression, and seeking help, and all I have to say is hallelujah. It's about time that it's being accepted, and because I've been a mental health advocate for years, saying the same thing. But
whoever decided that mental health was somehow different from physical health, it's like, well, most of the time my brain is in my body. Not always, but that's where it generally hangs out. So this, I call it a false, dichotomy, that somehow it's different. It's like, no, you just have these things, and the the thing most people don't understand is that there are very common challenges that a relationship is going to encounter. And if you know what they are, and if you can develop a way of dealing with them, of approaching them, then you take a lot of the work out of marriage. I don't like using the word work in relationship to relationship. Because it's like, to me, it's like, great, let's go out and plow the back 40 in 100% humidity and 100-degree heat. That sounds like a lot of fun. Let's go work at our relationship. And I think a lot of times that when we're putting in quote unquote work, it's that we don't understand the rules. We don't understand what makes relationships work, what makes them challenging. And one of the things I will say, and we were kind of talking about this before, is that the biggest challenge to any relationship is that you are now, always have been, and always will be two different people. Now what? What do we do now? How do we negotiate through this? And this is where people will say, marriage takes compromise, it takes sacrifice. No, it doesn't. Please don't do either of those things, because the problem with sacrifice and compromise is you are giving up something. And it's the concept of I have to give up something, as opposed to here are 10 choices. Which one works the best for us? Let's choose. We choose option 5, which means we're not choosing the other 9. We're not giving them up. We're just making a choice. And words matter. How we think about things matters.
Yes. I like that, Leslie, because it's so true. When a person in a relationship, when you compromise or give something up, there starts resentment. Yeah. I have to give this up, and I have to compromise. And sometimes one person compromises and the other one doesn't. Back when I was growing up, and I'm 65, it was expected of the wife to give things up, to compromise, and to support her husband. And I did do that, and I was resentful. And I'm glad that's changing.
Well, and it is in some respects, but it's not, because I back in the fall I wrote 25 blog posts about, it was 25 pieces of bad marriage advice. Because commonly accepted but bad marriage advice. And that concept of sacrifice and compromise, because that, you nailed it right on the head. It creates resentment. And resentment kills relationships.
Yes.
And people, and people think, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, or I don't, if I have this conversation with my partner, they're going to get angry. There's all this stuff that goes on, and it's like, okay. And, this is one of the things that I fight about, and I know it's one of the things that you're talking about in terms of the focus that mental health has gotten. It's like, this is not about punishment. No, going to see somebody like me doesn't mean you're broken or bad or any of those things. It just means there's something you don't know. But like I said, going back to thinking relationships are natural, who knew there was, it's like, there's something we can learn. I mean, John Gottman, who's the marriage relationship guru, who's been studying relationships for years. I mean, he's an expert. He can tell you. He's actually said that he can watch a couple for 10 minutes and know and predict with about 90% accuracy whether or not they're going to make it, because he watches their interactions. Yeah, I mean, and he's been doing it long enough that I believe him. And, you know, because what he pays attention to is how do they talk to each other? Are they respectful? Are they, you know, and there are things that we can do, but people think, oh, if I'm having a challenge with this person, it means we're not supposed to be together. Now, that is one possibility, but it's not necessarily written in stone that there's, you know, if you learn how to do things differently, you can end up with a different outcome.
Right, and I think that each individual has to work on their own inner self and their own, I call it baggage. Because if you, I know what drove me crazy with Matt was he would, when we were first married, silent treatment. If he was mad at me, then he wouldn't talk to me.
Right.
And that drove me crazy, or not respond. Right. I threw a plate at him one time. It broke. The Pyrex, they're not supposed to break, but it does.
Right.
Because I was so frustrated, I couldn't get a response from him. Now, right. I don't know. Yeah, it's frustrating.
Well, and good for you. I mean, and it was interesting because I was actually just talking to somebody this morning about this, and the things that people put up with. And most of the time they put up with it because they don't know how to address it productively. But, you know, that kind of treatment, and if John Gottman had been watching you, he would have said that is a predictor of an end of a relationship if that pattern doesn't change, right? And it's okay. And by the way, I actually tell people, do not try to have an in-depth conversation with your partner when one or both of you are upset. That generally is just going to lead to a fight. Now, when I say that, that does not mean we don't talk to our partner about what's going on. No, we just find a time and a place and a way to do it that is much more productive. But again, that's something that can be taught, because a lot of people, it's like, well, I'm angry, so I'm just going to spew. I was one of those people, and I had to learn that was really doing damage to my relationship. And if I wanted my relationship to survive, I couldn't do that. And so I had to learn, okay, I'm upset, keep my mouth shut until I can have a rational conversation with somebody. But that's not what we're told.
Right. That's true. My grandparents were married over 50 years, but they knew each other as children. And my grandmother would tell me that one would argue, one would be quiet and let that person talk. And that must have been the secret recipe for their marriage, that, you know, both don't yell at the same time. So when I was so tired of Matt ignoring me if I complained about something, that one time I gave him the silent treatment so he would know what it's like. He didn't like it. I said, well, now you know how I feel.
Right. It's like, let's stop this. Yeah, let's figure out a different way of doing this.
Yeah. And the marriage counseling back then wasn't over, like 40 years ago, isn't as common as it is today. Right. And I feel that couples should get marriage counseling before they get married. I think that would be very beneficial to go to someone like you and say, you know what, either we're going to get married or long-term relationship. I think it's best to have advice before you make that commitment.
Well, absolutely, because people would say, well, do I do premarital work? I said, was anybody willing to do it? Because I believe, if you start out knowing the rules of the game and how to play it successfully, you're going to be a superstar. But most people don't understand the rules of the game, and so they do what they've always done. And, I like to say every romantic relationship you have been in before this one has ended. What needs to be different so that this one will succeed? And a lot of people just look at it as like, well, it was the other person. Yes and no.
Yeah.
That person wasn't right for me. Okay. What does that mean? And, and if you think that this person is right for you, what's different? What's the same? What are you doing? What ingredients are you putting into the stew? And what ingredients are they putting into the stew? And is it something you want to eat, right? And so people, and a lot of this is we end up in our old patterns doing the same thing over and over again because it's familiar and comfortable and I know it. And then it's like, oh, wait, this isn't working. And so instead of looking at it as, oh, this person just isn't right for me. Now, there are some cases where that is true, but most of the time that's not what's happening. It's more we just don't know how to mesh our lives together. I talk about marriage and long-term relationships. The two metaphors I use are a three-legged race or a tandem bicycle. And you've got to work together. You've got to find that pace, that way of interacting with each other that both of you can do long-term. And that's where a lot of people struggle is because I keep trying to do the same thing and it's not working, so I just do more of it, do it louder, do it whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work if it's the wrong thing. But nobody has to take a relationship 101 class, and everybody should. Because when I do that, I understand relationship dynamics and how to successfully shift them.
Wow, that's incredible. I wish there was people like you over 40 years ago, Leslie, because we went for premarital counseling with the pastor, but it was a joke. It really wasn't premarital counseling.
Right.
It wasn't anything really, helpful. I think that, and I'm not putting down, if you go to whatever your place of worship is for premarital counseling, I'm not knocking it, but I would also consider going to a family marriage therapist like Leslie, because I'll go more, approach it from a different angle.
Right, and
I think.
Yeah, and my approach is from the practical, right? It's here's what works. And,
right.
And a lot of people are afraid of going. I mean, and especially now, a lot of couples aren't getting married under the auspices of, a religious ceremony, and so the Catholic Church has always done a really good job about premarital stuff. In terms of much more content than most. I think at one point in time it was 6 months you had to go through before you could get married in the Catholic Church. But a lot of what's done in premarital stuff like that isn't about the pragmatics, the practical. How are you going to make this work? It's and a lot of people are afraid to do it because they're going to tell me not to get married. It's like, okay, if that's the thought you have, then you already have some, red flags that you're not paying attention to. So that's like, okay, first off, that right there should stop you in your tracks. And that's not the point of it. The point of it is to prepare you for how to mesh your lives together. Because when you are in a committed relationship, and especially marriage, every decision that you make directly or indirectly impacts your partner. And every decision they make directly or indirectly impacts you. And so having a game plan, knowing what you want your relationship to look like, as opposed to just putting it on autopilot or, just leaving it to chance, sets you up for failure. There's who's the expression, I can't remember who said that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. But nobody looks at marriage that way. They look at pretty much every other aspect of their life, but not that one.
I've heard that quote, and I don't remember who said it either. Yeah, that's true. Like if I were to get married again, definitely I would go for pre-marriage counseling. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. But I used to tell Matt that after being married to him, I never want to be married again. But I knew
I hear that, and it just makes me sad, and again, I don't believe everybody should be married. It is a commitment. And one of my all-time favorite quotes is by a man named John Barth, and he said, "Marriage is our last best chance to grow up." And because building a life with another person is a challenge. You are going to be tested. You are going to be challenged. You are going to have to come up with solutions. You're going to have to be uncomfortable at times. It's, which is why the name of my podcast is Happily Ever After is just the beginning, because it's like, in the fairy tales, and they lived happily ever after, but nobody tells them how. Right? And,
right.
And so part of that is, how do you go the distance? How do you put in 100% and require your partner to put in 100%? And what does that look like? And, what do we need to be on the lookout for? And there's all kinds of warning signs, but people will be unhappy and they'll settle for things that, I was talking about the person I was talking to this morning, and her husband would give her the silent treatment, and it's like, okay, the first time that happens, sit down and have a conversation about it. What is this about? Why is this happening? What's going on? Because if we don't address it early, it then becomes the habit.
Yeah,
I had a client many years ago, and I know you warned me about this, so I'm going to be very careful. But her husband was verbally abusive to her, frequently in my presence. And we were having a meeting without him one day, and I said, the first time he called you the B word, why was it okay? And she said, well, it wasn't. And I said, well, 12 years later, he's still doing it. So somewhere he got the idea that it was okay. Because she didn't she didn't tell him that is not acceptable. That may not happen. So he thinks it's fine.
Right, because she allowed her husband to treat her that way.
Yeah.
And, and maybe she was from an abusive childhood. And
yes, and we repeat the patterns, right?
Yes.
And or we don't know how to get somebody to stop. And it's not about an ultimatum. This is where people get a little bit confused. It's about a boundary. An ultimatum is, I want you to do something different. A boundary is, this is what I'm willing to accept.
Yeah.
And on the surface, they look the same, but underneath, it's really about a place of, I am going to be my own advocate in this relationship. I am not going to put up with certain behavior. Now, that may mean I'm willing to walk away from the relationship. I'm not threatening to walk away from the relationship. It's subtle, but it's really important. And a lot of people get confused. And because the focus is on the other person. And the only person we have any control over is ourselves. Now, if somebody wants something from me, with me, I now have leverage, right? But if you don't care enough about me, if you don't care enough about our relationship to stop engaging in behavior that is harmful to me, I'm the one who has to say, enough, this is not okay.
Absolutely. Oh, you are just, Leslie, I have to say this, folks. I'm telling you, if you have trouble with your relationship, I would run, get in touch with Leslie, because she's just full of golden nuggets here, and I didn't even get to your books yet. What motivated you, Leslie, to write your books, and what would you like to tell about your books?
Oh, what motivated me to write my books? Well, getting caught in a very vulnerable state. I was the first book that I wrote. It was very interesting because I had known this man tangentially. His name is Bill O'Hanlon, and he's written a gazillion books. And he actually one of his books ended up, being one of Oprah's choices. And he was doing a talk, and I came up to talk to him afterwards, and I made some comment about, all the marriage books have been written. He goes, no, they haven't. And he said, what? I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, yours hasn't been written yet. So I blame Bill O'Hanlon for my first book. And it really was the reason why I wrote it, and the reason why it's called Blueprint for a Lasting Marriage is really, it's about having a plan. What is marriage, and what are the 5 common challenges to marriage? And those are finances, intimacy, friends and family, communication, and kids. Now, the kids is the one that may not, people are choosing not to have children, and that's fine. But the other 4 will show up in every single marriage. And how do you want to deal with them? And building your unit, for people who are familiar with the movie Meet the Parents, it's the circle of trust. You and your partner create this entity, this relationship, and you determine who influences it and how to protect it. And you never stop being you as an individual. You are now you plus this other person. And how are we going to navigate through life? So that was the reason why I wrote the first book. And then several years ago, I started to get a little frustrated with how husbands were being looked at, treated, assumptions made about them. And I truly, from my personal experience working with couples, that most of the men I worked with were good guys who loved their wives, loved their families. They just didn't know how to be the husbands and fathers they really wanted to be. And so that's where the hero husband comes from. And it's about, the book is actually written using various superheroes. I start with Batman and end with Captain America. I go through Superman and Spider-Man and Ant-Man and Daredevil, and I forgot all the other ones. Thing, and I can't remember how many other superheroes. Oh, Green Lantern. But bringing in their characteristics and what they need to let go of, which was, Batman being very isolated, it's like I don't want to be emotional. Because he was hurt. His parents were killed, and he was protecting himself. And a lot of men do this. They don't know how to open up and be connected to the woman that they truly adore. And so that was the purpose for the second book.
Wow, that is so true. And I'm glad you wrote that book, because there's reasons why men are not emotionally available, because they don't feel safe to tell their wives or girlfriends how they feel, because they're afraid of being judged or being seen as less than what you would call, I don't know, manly.
Right.
As Leslie, right. In our society, if a man cries, back when I was growing up, and even if a girl cried, that was considered a weakness. You don't show your weakness. And this has been drummed into men, especially from my generation and before, constantly. And I think we just need to change how we raise our sons. And
and there are some natural characteristics, but you're right. And a lot of times, and this is where I do believe that women tend to have a little bit more of an advantage, because we are allowed and encouraged to experience a broader range of emotions than traditionally men have. And, when you get into this, well, big boys don't cry, just suck it up, be a man, all this other stuff, that the two emotions that men are really allowed are anger and lust. And so everything gets shunted into those things. So if they're sad or afraid or whatever, it comes out as anger, and then most of the softer emotions comes out as lust. Now, because, and this is one thing that, most men aren't just hound dogs. They're just not, it's not about necessarily the sex. But it's one way they're allowed to tap in to their more loving, connected emotions, which is what their wives want. And so when people understand the dynamics and how to invite each other into this safe space where you can really open up and share at that deeper level, the intimacy, not just the physical intimacy, but the emotional intimacy and the intellectual intimacy. And it's like, I'm letting you see me, intimacy, into me you see. I'm showing you who I am, and I'm trusting you to hold that gently and not use it against me.
Yes, that's you're a treasure. I just want to hug you. That is, I'll tell you what, if there's or any guys listening out there, I would get that book, because that book sounds phenomenal. And your Facebook group, can you tell the audience about that? Facebook for Men. I'm happy about that.
Well, and it's one of the things where, and I called it Good Guys, Great Husbands for a reason, because most of the men I work with are good men. They are, I go back to, and I had to learn this myself. When my husband and I were first married, we didn't have our son until we'd been married almost 7 years, because both of us were in grad school, and it was like, okay, this is just crazy. So people would ask me, when are you going to have a child? And I would, in my very sophisticated, well, you mean another one? Implying that my husband was a child. My husband has never been a child. Ever. Yes, when he was little, but as a man, he was perfectly capable. He did his own laundry, he cooked, he had a job, he was supportive of me. There was he wasn't a child. And so this idea that all men are children, I actually got into an argument on Facebook with somebody, which I usually try never to do, but she not only was calling her husband a child, but all men children. And I said, I'm not letting that one go by. That is not okay. That is not true. And most of the men I know are capable, loving, involved people, but they're getting this bad rap because they're a man and ergo you're a child, and it's like, no, they're not, and stop that. And I just got really annoyed. So I created this space on Facebook, and it's really about men being able to support each other in a positive way. I'm actually the only woman allowed in the group because I want them to have that safe space where they can say things that in a judgment-free zone.
I think that's great.
That doesn't mean they're not going to get called on some of their unhelpful ways of looking at things, but done in a supportive understanding. And of course you would think this because this is what your experience has been. And one of the things that I want women to understand is that part of the reason why men automatically jump to fixing things is because they don't want the people that they love to be in pain. And so when they see their wives upset about something, they want to fix it. They want to take the pain away, right? And if they can't take the pain away, they feel like they have failed. And women don't understand that. Women think, oh, he thinks I'm incompetent. No, he doesn't. He does not think you're incompetent. He wants to protect you. He wants to keep you safe and keep you happy. That's why he goes into fix-it mode.
That is true. I just I love that. I love the concept that Facebook, a group for men to feel comfortable, and also to learn about different ways to handle their emotions in a safe, constructive environment. So I think that's great. So if you are listening and you're a guy, join the Facebook group. Good guys, great husbands. Do they have to be? They don't have to be married to join your group, though.
No,
okay.
They do not. It's just any man who wants to have good relationships. And by the way, the rules of relationships are the same no matter what relationship you're in. So if I know how to be a good father, I also know how to be a good husband, how to be a good brother, how to be a good coworker. All the skills are the same. They're used slightly differently, but the skills are all the same.
And yes, that's true. And your podcast is marriage advice, relationship advice.
I like you. I have lots of guests that come on and talking about varying aspects of relationships, because I always hope that even though some of my guests will say the same things, they say it in a different way, and I'm always hoping that, this guest got through to that listener this time. Because it's like, they're speaking my language. Got it. And the thing is that the quality of our relationships determines how happy and content and loving and wonderful our lives are. If we're caught in these unhealthy, unhelpful, unsupportive relationships, we don't feel good. It impacts our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health. And people think, I'm just stuck. It's like, no, you're never just stuck. You're only stuck if you don't reach out and figure out how to do it differently.
True.
But so there's programs like yours, there's programs like mine. There's lots of information out there. The challenge is, how do you use that information? And one of the things I want people to understand is one partner doing something different, more productive, is going to change the system.
I can understand that, yep.
If I stop arguing with you, not going off and not talking to you, but if I stop, oh, by the way, my husband proved this to me. I used to say this to my clients, and then my husband did it, and I went, crap, it does work. my husband and I don't fight very often, and we were actually having a fight, and he literally said to me, I am not going to fight with you anymore. And he stopped. He didn't walk away. And I was like, and I kept trying to re-engage him, and he just kind of looked at me and was like, I'm not doing that. And it was like, oh, and I couldn't fight with him. I mean, it took all the hot air out of my balloon. But but it's knowing how to have conversations that are effective. It's because if we can't talk about the simple things, we're never going to be able to talk about the challenging things.
That's true.
So people avoid them, and then they just get buried and fester, and until one person, this person I was talking to this morning said, her husband came to her one day and said, do you still want to be married to me? And she said, I paused, and then she realized in that moment, no, she didn't, because of the patterns that had existed. And, and that's, unfortunately, people, and this is where one thing that men do that they need to stop doing is in their minds, they say, oh, it's not that bad. And they're not the only ones. A lot of women do this too, but it's like, well, it's not that bad. And my response is, how bad does it have to get? If somebody isn't talking to you for 2 weeks, I think that's pretty bad.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Oh my goodness, that's true. I've worked with 2 women, and their husbands wouldn't talk to them, and they were mad at them for like 2 weeks. I'm like, what? And you put up with that? It's like, what is that about? It's like, but and then this is what happens is they say, well, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, it's not that bad. And then their wife comes and says, I want a divorce. And now hair on fire. And by that time, if one person is asking for a divorce, that's it. Can the relationship be saved? Yes, it's a lot harder. I liken it to, by that time you're in stage 4 cancer. Could you survive? Maybe, but it's going to be really painful. It's going to be really difficult. The best thing would have been keep yourself healthy in the first place. Or at least keep getting checkups so that when your doctor says, oh, this is pre-cancer, you can do something about it. Right. Yeah, I'm all for being proactive and nipping problems in the bud.
Right. And everybody needs to know how to do that. And if you haven't seen a good relationship, then it's going to make it even harder. And we are now on 2nd, 3rd, possibly even entering into 4th generation divorces, because what was it, the late 60s, early 70s, when divorce became much easier to get, then people see these things, irreconcilable differences. There are really only a few truly irreconcilable differences. One, I want a baby, you don't. That is truly irreconcilable. I want to sell all my worldly possessions and wander the earth, and you want a 2-story house with a white picket fence. Those are irreconcilable. How we fold the towel, that's not irreconcilable.
Right. Well, where can people reach you, Leslie?
Well, they can go to my website. I actually have 2. I have one called the Hero Husband Project, all one word, theherohusbandproject.com. That's the one that I have for men. And then I also have foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. They can reach me by email at leslie@foundationscoachingnc.com, or they can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463.
I want to thank you. And your books are on Amazon.
Yes, my books are on Amazon.
And I want to thank you, Leslie Durez, for coming on and sharing your great wisdom. You are fantastic, and I want to encourage the audience about listening to your show and purchasing your books and to contact you for counseling, coaching. And you know what? It's okay to say, you know what, I think we need some help here. And yep. It's okay. Preventive. I think it's good to do preventive maintenance, as you were talking about, checking up. And it doesn't mean that your marriage is failing or your relationship just because you want a third party whose objective to help you to have a better relationship. So I thank you for all that you do to help other people. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. Folks, all the information about Leslie Durez will be in the blog. So please read the blog that Jeannie White, who's station manager, writes. So I thank Jeannie for that. And Jeannie also produces the show. She's station manager, Passionate World Talk Radio. And I want to thank Lillian Cauldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Please share this show to help other people. And that's my mission. That's my vision, for people to know that they're not alone. There are resources out there. You just have to know where to find them. And Leslie Durez is a wonderful resource to contact, to know. And I wish there was Leslie Durez's over 40 years ago. I'm glad that there are people like you now to help couples. Excuse me. And if you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, please do, so you don't miss any of my phenomenal guests. I'm on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, to name a few, and I would appreciate that. The more people that know about Chatting with Betsy, the more people can be helped. And that's my mission, and that's my vision, and that's why I do Chatting with Betsy. I do it to help others because I feel that's what I was called to do. And I thank you all for listening. Appreciate it so much. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because if we all did that, it would be a kinder, much kinder, brighter world that we certainly do need, especially in these times. So I want to thank everyone for listening. And until we chat again, be careful, be safe. And this is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.